Hello. Today I'm working on a 2002 Saturn VUE. It's my mom's car. She complained of not having any water come out when she pressed the windshield washer button, or pulled it back to her. So I figured it's one of a couple different things. I read that if the wipers work, then it's not a fuse problem because it's on the same fuse as the washer fluid motor. So that was ruled that out. Next step was I figured it's probably the motor itself, which is this guy right here. She had taken it to a shop and they said that they couldn't get the parts. Quick search on Amazon, 16 bucks, got the part in. So I've already kind of taken it out and replaced it, but I decided I'd do this video because what I noticed that there weren't very many videos on these Saturn VUEs. And so I figured I'd try to contribute since YouTube has helped me so much, and all the forums and everything else have helped me with all kinds of stuff. So this is my attempt to give a little back. So the first thing I did, if you look here, there's a 7mm bolt that holds in the reservoir in the front, and then there are two 10mm bolts, one for this. Okay, it goes in the reservoir for the antifreeze, and there's one in the back too. You got to take both of these off. So what you do, essentially, this thing's tucked down in there and you can't get it off without moving this. So you just basically take those two bolts off, you pull this back like so, and then you can slide this out and get to the actual motor, which is here. So this is the motor itself, and all it does is has a couple of tubes coming in and out of it, and then this is your connector for the motor. So I did also want to note that there's a little, looks like a grommet in here. When you order one of these, it comes with the grommet, but the grommet doesn't actually have a filter. This is a little filter, which I think is pretty helpful because I looked in here, I looked inside there before I cleaned it out. It had a lot of that nasty blue, I guess blue dye or whatever it is they put in that washer fluid. And so this was probably helping the motor to keep from getting clogged. So instead of putting just the grommet back in from the new one, I went ahead and cleaned that filter with some soap and water, and I'm going to reuse that so that the motor doesn't get clogged up with all that blue junk as much. Okay, so first thing, obviously, when I took this out, I didn't replace anything. I just used a cool little tool that I'll tell you about in a second to give this ground in 12 volts and to make sure that the old motor was in fact bad. Okay, so I knew it was either, if it wasn't the fuse, it was either the motor or the switch, and so I wanted to check the motor and make sure that the motor was bad before I replaced it. I gave it 12 volts. The left side is the ground and the right side is the 12 volts. So to do that, I used this little tool. It's a cool little tool called a power probe. And what you do is hook this to your battery, positive and negative. There's a long cord that goes to it. But then essentially what you can do is, this will give negative, and then the probe itself, this is kind of like a high-end test light. And so you can actually test to see, okay, that's got negative, so it's got ground, and you can actually give it 12 volts by pushing up. Okay, that's giving it 12 volts. The motor's not doing anything, so we know there's a problem with it. Okay, anyway, this power probe is pretty cool. I thought I'd mention it real quick. It was sitting in my toolbox for a couple of years because I didn't want to take the time to learn how to use it. I always just went to my old test light. Once I actually took the time to understand it, I've been using it ever since. It's a great tool. You can provide ground to a source. You can provide 12 volts to a source. You can use it, has nice little lights on it. You can use it like a regular test light as well. It tells you where there's positive and ground on a circuit. You can tell it to beep and stuff like that if you want, or turn that off. Anyway, great little tool. I figured I'd mention that. Back to this. So essentially, to get this thing back in here, this is the connector. So I'll push the connector over here, but what we're going to do is we're just going to pick this up, okay, and we're going to kind of move it back. You got to kind of finagle it in there, but once you get it into a good spot, get it a little ways down in there, and then you can put your connector back on. Okay, and you just slide that connector on there and pop it in. Okay. Make sure it clicks on there. There we go. Okay, so to get that connector off, you just push these little tabs and pull it up. Okay. You might want to try to get the connector off before you get it all the way out, because like I said, it's not quite long enough to get out easily. Okay, and then we're going to kind of route these back in here, pop them in. Okay, same with the other side. There's little routes for these tubes that you got to kind of get in there. Okay, pop them in there. All right, so now we're ready to slide it in a little bit more here. All right, make sure we don't crimp the wires or anything. Back it off. And what it does is it just fits in a little tab down in there so that it doesn't move from the bottom, so there's no bolts in the bottom to worry about. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then you just kind of find that hole in the bottom, and you see, push it down in there. Make sure you squeeze your wires in there, your tubes in there again. Okay, so that's all there. Now this slides back on here. There's a little tab. If you notice, there's a little tab in there that this reservoir hangs on. Okay, so you make sure you put it on there, else you might break that tab off. And essentially, that should be about it. This little clip right here just clips down in there to hold that from getting squished. You can keep the camera right there for a second. I'm going to grab these bolts, put them on in here. And like I said, there's a 7mm in the front and two 10mm in the back. So let's go with the 7mm first. Okay, real quick here. I'm just going to kind of get it in there, not tighten it yet, until I get these two located. Okay. There we go. Just kind of get the bolts in there finger tight first before you lock anything down, just so you can easily maneuver things if things aren't lined up quite right. Okay, and then we'll start to go ahead and tighten things up. You don't want them too tight. You don't want to bust the plastic, obviously. If you're new to doing this kind of stuff, just take your time and it'll work out. And then I wanted to show you one more thing, is that the original setup has a little screen underneath. So there's a grommet that holds this in, and there's a little screen on the original one. With the new one, it just was a grommet. There was no screen. And there's a lot of nasty little stuff that gets in there from the the washer fluid. And if you point down, look down here on the ground, this is what came out of there. So this kind of sludge stuff is getting built up in there. So what I did is I cleaned that screen. I cleaned that screen just with some soap and water, so that the new motor would have that benefit of that filter as well. I'm going to put that back in instead of the one that came with it. Okay, so now we're just going to put a little fluid in there, and grab this real quick. Put a little fluid in there. Let's see how she goes. And I do know that also one of the sprayers up there on the windshield is bad as well. The little inside came out of it, so it's kind of just, it's not really spraying, it's just kind of blurting out of there. So we will see that as a problem, but we'll fix that as soon as we can get that little part in. So now I'm just gonna, if you just keep the camera right here, I'm just gonna get in there and pull that spray nozzle, and it's gonna take a minute to fill all the tubes and everything to get the pressure built up, but it should start squirting. this little thing has the inside's kind of missing out of it, so it just kind of falls out of there. So we'll get a new one of those later. I may make a video on that as well. But anyway, that's it. That's how you change the motor for your reservoir pump. And hopefully all is well. Thank you for watching, and I hope this helps somebody out.